Welcome to the Midlife Maverick Podcast, where we explore innovative approaches to health and wellness. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Jabe Brown, the founder of Melbourne Functional Medicine. Jabe holds a Bachelor of Health Science in Naturopathy and a Master's of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine. With a relentless pursuit of better health outcomes, Jabe integrates the latest research and evidence with individual patient data, making complex health concepts relatable and actionable. His approach is rooted in treating the root cause of health issues, empowering patients to understand their bodies and guide them back to better health. In today's episode, we dive into Jabe's journey into functional medicine, his passion for health optimization, and insights into how men in midlife can enhance their well-being. Please join me in welcoming Jabe Brown to the show. I'm glad that you've jumped on the show, and I'm looking forward to having a chat, and I'm sure all of the listeners will be too. Mate, before we kick in, I'm just curious, has there been anything new and exciting you've been learning about health lately?
There's always new and exciting things. So I guess it's a matter of which ones do I feel, are exciting me at the moment and worth talking about. And there's a couple of molecules that I'm interested in recently. First is something called Urolithin A. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of Urolithin A, yes.
Amazing stuff. So for years, naturopaths have been putting people on stuff like pomegranate peel extract, all right? And it appears to do wonderful work with the microbiome. Turns out what also happens is you have this pomegranate peel and then your bugs eat it, and there's all sorts of good stuff that happens that I'm not going to go into except for one thing. They produce a postbiotic product, which basically means a product that they're making. And so they wouldn't have made that if you didn't feed them pomegranate, right? And then this postbiotic product called Urolithin A has all sorts of health effects, of which the main one, and I suppose the easiest one to talk about, is it's what's known as a mitophage, which means it breaks down. So it does autophagy on your mitochondria. So autophagy is the breaking down of faulty cells and like the cleaning out of the bits of the cell that aren't doing very well. And it does that in your mitochondria. And as we all know, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, it's what health is all about. Like when you look at all the longevity stuff, it's all mitochondria. And so it's breaking down the mitochondria that aren't serving for you. But the interesting part about it is that not everyone has the right bacterial species to create that postbiotic product if they had the pomegranate. So it doesn't work for everyone. But now you can just buy Urolithin A and just take it as a capsule, and I reckon that's amazing. So that's one that I'm super into recently. And the other one that's a little bit interesting, but do your own research on, is methylene blue, which you hear about from all the US podcast people, but pretty amazing stuff. Short answer on that is it kind of acts like an injection of energy or energy output from your mitochondria. Mitochondria again, and so it's has a pretty big difference on the way people feel. It's pretty great.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Have you actually tried that Urolithin A yet, or not yet?
Yeah, I'm taking it now.
Fair enough. Did you notice the difference when you started taking it?
No, but I don't know that you necessarily will from Urolithin A, because it's breaking down old faulty cells, and like you might kind of feel better over time, but it's not like you're expecting a big outcome from it immediately. Yes. It's the sort of thing that over time you'll age better as a result of it. So it's like a health span longevity tool. And maybe some people feel a little bit better. I don't feel any different, but it feels good to know that I am taking it.
Yeah, definitely. What about the methyl blue? Are you on that as well? You haven't got a blue tongue at the moment, so I can't.
I don't have a blue tongue, but I am taking methylene blue, and I do think I notice a difference.
Okay. Yeah, nice one, mate.
I'm only taking a very, very small dose.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a blue tongue, but you do get blue pee afterwards, which when you mix with your B vitamins, riboflavin, B2, yellow and blue makes green. And so it makes some interesting things in the toilet bowl.
It glows in the dark, I'm sure. Mate, I can remember the first time I experimented with beetroot juice. I used to be a triathlete, and I was getting into the beetroot shots. And obviously you take that down, and then when you piss, it's like dark red, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on
Yeah,
there?
whoa, am I after the doctor? Whoa, what's going on?
Yeah,
We could
exactly.
make all sorts of colours. You could do the methylene blue in your beetroot. You could get purple happening.
Yeah,
You could
yeah,
get
that's it, mate.
B vitamins.
Maybe we're onto something. Jabe, just talking to you initially and just asking that question, you're obviously very passionate about health and longevity. Would you say that's your big passion and purpose right now?
Part of it.
Hmm.
My passion and purpose is to be helping people. I know it's cliche. I know it's cliche, but I think it's cliche for a reason, because a lot of people genuinely feel like they want to do that. And so I like helping people. I like educating, and I like problem solving. And it just turns out, doing what it is that I do, humans are a problem to be solved when they've got some health issues. And you can solve it by doing the brain work of figuring out what's going on, and then educating them. And the outcome is that you get to help them. And so for years and years and years, I've been doing that in terms of helping people with complex health problems where they're trying to navigate themselves away from something. And so I'm trying to move their health forward towards a sort of a neutral health, or not bad health. And optimizing is the same thing. You're moving someone's health forward. You're just starting at a place that isn't, that they're not immediately challenged by. They're just wanting to improve on it. But
Yep.
you still get to do all the same stuff. It's just you can share more with people because the conversations are pretty similar. So we can have a conversation about optimizing, and it's going to apply for many of the people who are listening. Whereas if you and I are having a conversation about Crohn's disease, then it's going to be less relevant for everyone. And so
Yep.
optimizing is a pretty cool place to be able to share and do the stuff that I am passionate about.
Yeah, wicked, mate. I can't wait to dive into that. I want to talk about lots of optimizing. But before we do, I'd love to know a little bit about your history. Like, what got you into functional medicine in the first place?
Every time I do an interview, I tell this story. And when I was younger, we'll say, I was the guy who I'm eating vegetables. Potatoes are a vegetable, and these potato chips are made from potatoes. So I'm doing a healthy thing. I was, I was not great in terms of my health, and I wasn't. Kind of listening to the people who were close with me. And at the time, I was seeing a girl who was a naturopath or studying naturopathy, and I was, belligerent and thought I knew best and all this kind of stuff. And no good. I look back now and cringe. And then I went through a bit of a rough patch, and it's always the same for people who are into health, StreTch. It's you get into it because you're trying to solve a health problem from yourself, or you've been through some kind of crisis. Something drives you to it. I've found, and most people I've been talking to. So I went through my little dark patch when we had a breakup, and then I was, spiraled down, and then, bounced back up. And so I'm at that time listening to all of the Anthony Robbins stuff. I'm reading all these dietary books. I'm exercising like a madman. I'm putting all of the stuff into a smoothie, and it got to the point where I was like, I don't care how it tastes. I'm just going to put all of the good stuff into here. And so I was putting celery in there, and I was putting in egg, and then like flax seeds. And then one day I put in sardines into the same cocktail, and that was about as far as it got. That was no good. Point is, I was pretty into it, and my mates were just about paying me to shut up and stop trying to solve their health problems. And I realized, you know what? I could do this. I enjoy it. And instead of people paying me to shut up about it, maybe people would pay me to do it. And so I went off and started studying, and now it's all history, and this is what I do day in, day out.
Beautiful, mate. It's always a good story. Then, can I ask, what was there a health struggle along the way?
I've got celiac disease.
Yep.
And so I didn't really understand what that is beyond don't eat gluten, but I suffer for it, the fatigue and all that kind of stuff. And then you start learning a little bit about health, and you're like, oh, it's like these onion where you start peeling back all of the layers. And it's kind of like, oh, that's why I need to sleep more than the next person, and all these kind of realizations. And so it's always a very exciting topic, learning about yourself. And then it turns out that if you can learn about yourself and you're super motivated to do that, you can do it for others as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it, mate. That's exactly it. Well, I'm glad to hear that you've got on top of that celiac stuff and that you're prioritizing your health and keeping yourself on track, mate. Let's dive in to talk about optimization. How would you define like optimizing your health or health optimization?
It depends on who you're talking to, where they're starting from, and what their goals are. So when someone comes in and does an initial consultation with us, we call it a kickstart. In order for me to help them, the goal is always the same. It's to move their health forward, because it doesn't matter where you start. Just if you can move it forward, you do better than if you didn't. And the more you move it forward, the better you do. There comes a point where you're getting only a very marginal gain in moving your health forward for a whole lot of effort. And somewhere there, the payoff's not really worth it. But for most people, when they're looking to optimize, they're looking to move forward. So what I always want to understand is what someone's driven by, because optimal for them or what their goals are different to the next person. And so for some people, it's sports performance. Some people, it's just energy. Some people, it's cognition. Some people, it's longevity, and they're aware of that. And then, we have the conversation about health span and how to differentiate between the two. And so I want to understand what someone's driven by and then where they're at and how to bridge the gap. And so health optimization does depend, but I think at its most simple, it's just about trying to figure out how to live in a way that works for your body and to give you the outcomes that you're after with your health and your life. And for many people, it ends up being about health span, because if you are living in a way that works well for your body and you can do that for a long time, then you've got longevity, but you also have a high quality of life. But there's all these other things on the way that people can be driven by. Like if optimization for you is, I want to figure out how to be up on stage in a bodybuilding event, then that's a very different set of goals that you're after and a different health effect than if someone is looking to optimize for health span and longevity. And sometimes it's not the case that what you're doing with your health to optimize for physical performance is actually healthful, but it's still looking to optimize for whatever it is that you want.
Yeah, awesome, mate. I'm glad that you've made that definition and you've sort of talked about how individualized it is, because sometimes, we can put athletes at the top and think, these guys are super healthy and fit and strong and, that's what we want to be like. But the reality of that, of what they're doing, what they're putting their bodies through to be top level athletes is very different, I think, from, the average person who just wants to live longer, have more energy and feel better in their body. And we don't have to beat ourselves up quite as much, hopefully. So I'm curious, like, in your business, how many people are coming to you for this health optimization, and how many people are coming to you like they're in a bad state and they need to just get their health back to normal? What are you sort of seeing? What numbers?
Well, at the moment, this isn't going to actually ask the question that you're really trying to ask, but at the moment in our business, it's probably about 60% of our business pertains to people who have got problems where they want us to play health detective and move their way forward, which leaves 40% for optimization. But if we weren't seeing any optimization people, then it'd be 100% on disease care. And if we weren't doing any of that, then it'd be 100% on optimization. And so it's because we've been doing the get people well care for a long time and then decided we'd start doing this. That's a growing area. And so ask me this question in a year and those percentages will be inversed. And so what I'm excited to be able to say is that I think that the market or people by and large are becoming interested in looking after their health, not just when they break. And that's a really exciting change to see on the market, and so much money and interest moving towards this area. There's so much research going on to longevity and aging at the moment, and it's an exciting trend, I think.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Preventative health and just getting ahead instead of waiting for the reactive health that our conventional medicine system does. It's great news to hear, and it's awesome to hear that more and more people are, expressing interest in that and coming to you for that sort of stuff. I'm sure it's an exciting change from maybe working with people who are trying to get out of, the health problems and just get back to normal, but people who are actually taking it further. And I dare say some of the people that work with you coming from that state, getting back to normal, then take it further to go, okay, well, what can I be doing next to just improve it? Yeah.
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 And it happens the other way where someone's interested in optimizing their health and then they don't know there's a whole lot of things burbling underneath. Or even if there aren't things burbling underneath that they weren't aware of, they're not aware that the way they're feeling at the moment, it's normal for them, but it's not how they need to be feeling. And so often people come in for optimization. It sounds like, whoa, 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 whoa. Maybe you don't need to be taking the methylene blue and the Urolithin A and the NMN and the resveratrol. Maybe we should just pare it back to the basics to
Mm.
start
Yep.
instead of optimizing on this kind of a shaky foundation and just doing all the cool stuff.
Yep.
Let's go and learn the basics, get a solid foundation, then optimize on top of that. So sometimes you got to walk people all the way back.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do want to talk about supplements and the right time and place, I suppose, to be looking at all that sort of stuff, because I think a lot of us jump ahead. It's easy to take the pill or the supplement, maybe a lot harder to change the underlying behaviors. But before we get to that, I'm curious, you probably get asked all the time, like, oh, what can I do to optimize my health? But I'd like to actually start with maybe the opposite, like flip the switch. What are we seeing that a lot of people are doing that's probably compromising their health? What are the common mistakes, do you think, a lot of us are making?
For people in general, or people who are already trying to optimize?
I think well, it could be a mix of both, I suppose. Just let's just start with people in general. What are the big things that, or the big mistakes we're seeing just in general when it comes to health span, longevity, I suppose having more energy, like less aches and pains. I think that's what, a lot of people in their midlife are sort of thinking about. I'm getting older. Is it really age that's causing all these aches and pains? Or is it something else that's going on? And what mistakes do you think that we're making here?
It's the basics. It's always just the basics. It's that we in the modern world, and don't get me wrong, I feel pretty great about being in the modern world because, I'm sitting in an air-conditioned room. I'm not needing to go hunting for my food. Like, I've got my safety and security taken care of. The modern world, though, sets us up to live in a way that our bodies weren't designed for. And then you pay the cost for doing that. And so the mistakes that people are making are in having the trappings of the modern world and the convenience lifestyle, but not doing the stuff, taking that too far and not giving the body the basics. And so the basics of it are the 4 pillars that at this point I feel like everyone should just be about on the same page on these 4 pillars, or pretty close variation. It's the food that you eat matters. That's one of them, right? Nutrition, eat. And then there's movement matters. And then there's sleep's pretty important. And then there's what's going on with the state of your body, your mindset, and your stress levels, right? So those are kind of the 4 basics. And then for all of them, we're not living in congruence with what evolutionarily we were designed to do. And so if we want to do you want to go through the pillars?
Yeah, let's do it, man. I'm all ears. Let's do it.
Amazing. So let's take the eat pillar, right? Well, we are now living in bodies that are a product of evolution over hundreds of thousands of years. And then for all this time, we're living relatively the same way. We're essentially hunter-gatherers. We're going around, we're eating the food that we can find. Agriculture comes along, and then we're still kind of doing okay. And then all of a sudden it goes, whoa, in the modern world. And now we're like, I heard some great words actually from Mark Lucky. He said, now we are hunting with our thumbs. We're using apps. We're gathering in plastic, and we're doing delivery by diesel, right? And what we would have been evolutionarily is you find what food you can and you eat it. And you're probably not always going to be in times of plenty. There's going to be lots of food scarcity. And so the foods that you're eating are going to be whole foods that you can find in nature. So, there's a sort of a tip, number one. And then you're not going to be doing too much of it all the time. You're going to have periods where there's no food for 3 days, or there's not much food for a week. And then there'll be times of plenty. And what we're doing instead is we're eating foods that you don't find in nature because they don't store in the supermarket shelves as well, and they don't taste quite as good. And so we're eating all our processed foods. No, this isn't news to anyone. And then we're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And most people have never had a day in their life where they haven't eaten any food. And we're not giving it variance. And so your body doesn't have to calibrate and fine tune and constantly be changing its mechanisms. Now we're just in times of plenty all the time. And so what that does biologically is keeps the growth signals on. And so your body is producing more cells, being wasteful with resources. Times of scarcity, what happens is your body starts breaking down cells, going into processes of autophagy like we were talking about earlier, which you can hack with your urolithin A for your mitochondria. And we're just not getting that. And then with the food itself, here's an interesting thing. I'm rambling here, but go ahead for a minute. So I listened to a lecture by an Australian researcher called Benjamin Bickman a few years ago. And I haven't followed up on this, but illustrative point, and these are the stats that he said. He said, what matters is your insulin to glucagon ratio. So insulin's job is to take fuel that is in excess in your blood and then take it out of the blood and move it into your cells. And so you're doing two things there. You're making sure that your glucose levels don't go too high, because if your glucose levels go too high, you die. It's called hyperglycemia. And so you're making sure that doesn't happen. And that happens in today's world because we have sugar and we have all these carbohydrates, and the energy is so easy to take in that you just go bush, and your glucose levels are redlining and your body's trying to spit out insulin to get it out, right? But then what it's doing with that is it's putting it into your cells. That equals storing energy away for later. Great from a survival perspective. Let's store energy away. But we don't have any problems with excess energy. We got tons of it. And so what it means is that we get fat, right? Now, glucagon does the opposite. Glucagon says there's not enough energy, fuel for me to use at the moment. Let's start taking fuel from where I'm storing it and then move it into my blood so I can access it, right? So depending on what's going on with the insulin-glucagon ratio, if you've got more insulin than glucagon, then you're taking excess energy and storing it away. If you've got more glucagon than insulin, then you're taking energy and moving it in, right? So it matters between those. Now, what he said, and I haven't verified this, is that if you are having a high carbohydrate, low protein diet, then the insulin-glucagon ratio is roughly 4:1. Okay, so carbohydrates affect insulin in a big way. Protein affects insulin in a small way. Fat doesn't really affect it. And those are the three macros, right? So high carbohydrate, low protein, 4:1. High protein, low carbohydrate, about 1:1, and it can vary a little bit. If you have high amounts of carbohydrates and high amounts of protein, 80:1. Okay, 80:1. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, why? What's going on here? And if you think about it evolutionarily, there are not many foods that are naturally high in both protein and carbohydrates. I can really only think of one, maybe 1.5. Can you think of any foods that just in nature have got lots of protein and lots of carbohydrates?
No, I'd struggle to think of a food that's high in protein and high in carbs. Correct.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a clue on this, and this kind of made me think about it.
Yeah.
What is the population group that we want to grow most quickly?
Population group that we want to grow.
Is it the elderly?
Oh, no, it's probably our young, isn't it?
Right?
The young, yeah. So, yeah. So you're going to say milk, are you? You're going to say mother's milk.
Milk. Milk's got lots of carbs, lots of protein in it, and you feed it exclusively, evolutionarily, to the people that just need to grow incredibly quickly, right? And beyond milk, there aren't that many foods. Maybe lentils, but even then they're relatively low in protein to carbohydrates, right? So if there aren't foods available that naturally have both protein and carbohydrates, and your lifestyle is largely hunter-gatherer, and there's lots of food scarcity, well, if you catch a kangaroo, you're probably not bringing your kangaroo home and thinking, oh, well, let's not eat that yet until we go and find some wild yams to combine them with. You're just thinking, great, Roo, let's eat that for a couple of days. Then you're wandering around and you do find a bunch of wild yams. You're probably not thinking, let's move on and try and catch. You're just eating what you've got. But if you can find something that's got carbohydrates and protein at the same time, it's like all the stars are in alignment. Let's start storing things away for the future, right? And in today's world, we don't have to worry about that. Like, you have as much protein and carbohydrates combined as you like.
Mm.
And that's the kind of thing that, just by virtue of being in the modern world, we're not exposed to that variance that you would find in the way that your body was made. And then there's all of the more obvious stuff, like, you're probably not finding benzenes in nature, and chemical this and chemical that, and highly refined glucose syrup, fructose, whatever it is. You're not finding these things in nature. And in our world, foods that we're eating now, Twinkies don't really have a whole lot in the way of fiber in them. And we're convenience food, not so good for the body, right? So that's pillar number one.
Curious, just before we move on, I'm just curious because you're talking about the protein and carbs. Now, I've always been told that, like, okay, if I eat my protein before I eat my carbs, so often I'll sit down at breakfast, I eat a steak for breakfast, and I might follow it up with a fruit salad. The insulin response from that is going to be a lot lower than if I ate a bowl of cereal or I ate toast, because I've got the protein in there slowing down digestion, slowing down the release of the carbohydrates, and the insulin spike from that's going to be a lot lower. Would you agree with that? Or going on what you were saying, protein and carbs are going to push my insulin higher?
In terms of the spike for it, yes. Yeah. So volume makes a difference. So if you've got a small meal with a little bit of both, then there's going to be less glucose coming in less quickly, and so less of an insulin response. If you've got a bigger meal, then you're going to have more of it. And so this is the part that I don't think it is as simple as what it is that I was saying before, because in absolute sense, you just have a bowl of Fruit Loops for breakfast. There's so much sugar in that your insulin's popping right up. And so the idea of food combining, and this is what most of the nutritional literature or consensus is that if you have some protein with your carbohydrates, it slows it down. And it does tend to do that, but that doesn't mean that there's less in insulin over time as a result of it. But again, this is the part that I've not been able to arrive at a comfortable consensus with it. So it's more of a thought tool. But I absolutely wouldn't be recommending that you just load up on a ton of carbohydrates and then you're safer as a result of that. But I also have found that often the advice that we give people in terms of let's have carbohydrates and do your protein doesn't tend to play as well as if you have a protein-based meal in the morning. Wait for your metabolism window, which is kind of like the time that you're deriving energy from it, and then after that, then go and have your next meal with a different sort of ratio of macros. Practically speaking, no one really does it, but as a matter of interest, I think you are better to have a protein heavy morning relatively, and a relatively more carbohydrate-based evening meal, and that's just because the role of cortisol, which maybe we'll also do that one as well, right? So if you have, so first of all, cortisol is your stress hormone, but it gives you energy. It does inflammation. It keeps you going and awake. And so when you wake up in the morning, you're supposed to have what's known as a cortisol awakening response. Right? This is the surge of energy that you're supposed to get in the morning. Then cortisol levels go up, and then they kind of go down as the day ends. And then at night, they come right down, and then melatonin comes in place, and melatonin goes up, cortisol's low, melatonin cycles along, and then in the morning, they do the inverse, and that happens, right? So when you don't have enough in the way of energy in the system, then your body can start breaking down your stores. And so there's our friend glucagon again. But the way the body will do that is through cortisol. So you need cortisol in order to start breaking down those reserves. And so given that cortisol also gives you energy, better to be doing your protein in the morning, encourage your cortisol spike at the right time than to be doing that in the evening. And then in the evening, when you've got your carbohydrates that you don't metabolize in the moment, or you don't burn in the moment, your body stores. And it stores them in something called glycogen. Glycogen is basically your body's battery of carbohydrates. And then while you're asleep, your body taps that battery, and that allows you to have energy while you're asleep. Whereas if you don't have enough of those glycogen, then you start needing to burn new energy. Then you hit that by cortisol again. You don't want cortisol while you're asleep. And so it's not an absolute for everyone, but
Yeah.
what most people will find, because there is biochemical individuality, what you find is that most people do better with relatively more protein, less carbs in the early part of the day, and then the inverse. Bearing in mind that I've said relatively, I'm not advocating for going to bed or your evening meal just being spaghetti or something.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Exactly. I always thought that, like, what I've always done with a lot of my personal training clients, those morning trainers, the ones that get up and they typically come to the gym, and most of them are fast and they just come to the gym and train, or they just grab something quick and then be at the gym so they could train. And I was like, well, if you just train now and your cortisol is going to be super high, it's going to be protein and carbs that your body's going to crave right now. So for them to shift some of that back and be eating a little bit of carb in the morning, I didn't see it as a bad thing. Obviously, they're going to be more insulin sensitive. They've just burnt off a heap of energy by doing a hard workout in the gym. So that uptake of energy is going to be better for them in the morning, I would feel, than it would be later in the day. Whereas the clients who trained later in the day, I'd be pushing the opposite, like high protein breakfast, try to avoid all the carbs in the morning. Then maybe pre-workout, you'd probably have a little bit of carb, but then you want most of your carbs after that training session. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but it's contingent on what it is that you are doing and why you're trying to do it.
Yes.
So if you are training because you are wanting to lose weight, then putting your body into a caloric deficit state, and then replenishing yourself with amino acids, so that with protein, so that your muscles can, you can move through to an anabolic state and you're not breaking down muscles. Well, now you're going to get the energy from breaking down fat. If that was your goal, then if you have too much in the way of carbohydrates, then you're discouraging burning of those cells. But if your goal is to be maximizing weight gain and performance, then carbs are pretty good for that. And so again, depends on what it is that you're trying to do, and that everyone is different. And some people don't fuel well on carbs, and some people don't fuel that well on protein and or fat. And so you've got to figure out what works for your metabolism, what your goals are, and then work in the rhythms of that based on what's going on in the day, and again, what's happening with the body. Like if your body's not doing well that day, and you can measure that by HRV, then don't cause too much extra stress for yourself by demanding too much cortisol by underdoing your carbs.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very individualized. Yeah, I agree with you too. Like, to be honest, a lot of the guys at the gym were training. They were all there for the performance side of it, not were there for the weight loss side of it. So, and the ones that were, again, it's earning your carbohydrates. We used to say, like, if depending on where you are and your goals, but if your weight loss is there, well, it's where you've got to earn those carbohydrates. You can't just have them at any time. I'm curious now, like, to talk a little bit about, and only because we're on the nutrition topic, is like intermittent fasting. Because I think there's a lot of people that believe they're intermittent fasting and they're skipping breakfast, every day. It's the repetitive sort of habit they've got themselves into, thinking that that's a healthy thing for them. What are your thoughts around that now that we've just talked about like nutrition and macronutrients and, a little bit about food timing?
Depends on who you are, what you're trying to achieve, what age you are, what your metabolism is doing. The idea, I think, taking it down to its most simple, is give your body variance in the food that is coming in and your food timing, and then it will have to constantly adjust what it's doing, and so it's constantly calibrating itself and trying to do a better job. And I think if you do that, that's kind of like the main thing. But there's all sorts of other goals that you can have out of it. So when you are in enough calorie scarcity, your body will start breaking down your own cells. And that sounds like it's a bad thing, but what it does is it, instead of just making more cells when you've got plenty of energy and then leaving cells that are a little bit faulty still going, it goes, oh, I don't have any resources, any fuel coming in. So, and they've got these cells that really aren't doing that much, and there's these bits here that aren't quite right. Why don't I break down those and use those for fuel? That's the autophagy thing that we were talking about earlier. But the benefits of that are based on time that you've had away from food. And so, like, most autophagy starts, and again, depends on who you are, what's going on, all this kind of stuff, but like a couple of days not eating, right? And so intermittently, you could not eat for a couple of days, and then you'd get different benefits than if you're changing your food timing windows. But there are other things that are going on as well, in that you've got these processes in your gut. First is called peristalsis. And what that is the moving of large things along the digestive tract, right? So food starts at the top, and then we, like a caterpillar, kind of squelch it along, and we're breaking it down and doing this stuff as we're doing it until it gets to your colon. Now, that process is metabolically really expensive. That takes a lot of energy. Then only when you are not in peristalsis can you then start doing the cleanup. And that's it's like if you've got a party going on, that's peristalsis. And then you wouldn't want to be cleaning up, mopping the floor while you're in mid-party. That doesn't make sense. And so afterward, the peristalsis is done. Now we go along and we clean up all of the really small things that are gone. And what that results in, if you've got more of that happening, is a cleaner digestive system, and that means better microbiome. Now, you only get to do that if you're not doing peristalsis. And so if you are snacking, and it's like 3-ish hours, depends on what it is that you eat. There's the time in the stomach, and then there's time going through your small intestine until you get to the large intestine. But say 3 hours, 4 hours-ish, right? And so if you're eating every 3 or 4 hours, you're constantly in that peristalsis, so you don't get to have that the process of cleanup. And so if you restrict your food windows to a smaller intake part, then you get the benefits of all of that. And so when someone's intermittent fasting by not eating until 12, and then their food window is 12 till 8, there's benefits of that. But are you doing the fasting for that? Are you doing it for autophagy? Are you doing it for your metabolism? And if you are constantly making your body wait for food, sometimes that can slow your metabolism down. And so what I think intermittent fasting should be is focus on the word intermittent. And intermittent means not all the time. And so sometimes do a bunch of fasting and compress your food intake window. Sometimes don't. Sometimes stretch it out even more. And that evolutionarily is probably what the body would expect. And mostly in health, we find that if you do the stuff that your body was designed for, you get a better outcome than when you don't. And so for me, intermittent fasting is something you should do on and off, change what it is that you're doing, and just kind of experiment with what's going on with food.
Yeah, awesome, mate. I like that synopsis you put down. You talked about it before. It's applying, in a way, it's applying a different stress to the body at different times. We're going through different seasons, and we're making a change all the time, so the body has to keep adapting. Whereas skipping breakfast every morning isn't that change. And I like how you said it slows your metabolism down, because I think it's one of those things where people hear about some of the fantastic results we get from intermittent fasting and the cleanup of the bad cells and all these sort of things, and then they apply it just thinking that I just have to do it every day and I'm not hungry in the morning. And that's probably because their metabolism has slowed down. And I think there's long-term health implications that can come with that, along with, I suppose, any diet. When we look at it, we always hear about lots of podcasts, lots of people talking about certain diets, promoting certain diets. And we're not asking those questions like, who is this for and what goal is this for and how can this diet potentially help me, but also maybe what could go wrong with this diet that might go against my goals. Are you a fan of any particular diets, or what are the things you sort of go to for your clients?
I think the right dietary template is paleo, but let me back up for a tick on the intermittent fasting. That's not to say skipping breakfast isn't what's right for your body, but it's not what's right for everybody's body.
No.
And your body changes over time. If you are in growth phase because you're trying to maximize muscle gains, or because you're a kid or you're a teenager, don't do so much in the way of food scarcity. Like, your body wants to build. As you age more and you hit your later years, you need less in the way of calories. And so it might be that, decreasing your food intake window by skipping either breakfast or dinner helps in that regard, just to bring it all down. But if you are going to compress your food intake window, and this is like the old 16-8, and you can do the 20 and 4 or whatever it is that you want to do, not everyone who's intermittent fasting actually does better skipping breakfast. It's the easiest thing to do with the modern world because people don't tend to be as social over breakfast. But some people actually do better when they eat in the morning and then stop eating at like 2 p.m. It's just can be socially awkward. And so I'd encourage people in terms of their food timing, I'd encourage people to play around with it and to challenge themselves. I think that consult with your doctor first. This is not medical advice. Having said that, if your doctor's okay with it, everyone would do well or be well served to do a protracted fast at some point in their life. And so a protracted fast, I mean like 3 days, 4 days or something like that. And there are different ways that you can do that. And I won't bore you with the detail of those. But the outcome from that is that you learn a lot about your relationship with food and you break that unconscious truth that everyone thinks that they've got of when hunger climbs, it keeps climbing until I eat. And then you break that and you realize that actually isn't the way that it works. But most of us have never done that. And so you can learn a lot about your relationship with food from going through that. But to answer your actual question, paleo. It got not popular because of the Pete Evans stuff, and people become dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
But at its most basic, paleo is eat foods that your grandma would probably recognize as belonging in nature and that you could probably find.
Yeah.
You're probably not finding a spaghetti bush. I've never seen a Twinkie tree. I don't even know why I'm talking about Twinkies. They're not even for sale in Australia. But find foods that you can find in nature and you'll do better than if you don't. And so paleo classically means no grains. I don't think you need to be dogmatic. I think it's just a template that you should have some variance on. Like I don't never eat grains, but I don't think that when I'm loading myself up with them that I'm doing myself a favor. And I am pretty convinced that if I have a whole lot of fibrous vegetables and a whole bunch of good protein, animal meats and stuff, that my body probably recognizes it. It probably isn't loaded with a whole bunch of chemicals and stuff that my body doesn't recognize, and that it does well nutritionally. Like there's lots of nutrients in whole foods. And the more you process it, the less nutrients there are, the more preservatives and other stuff there are, and the more it spikes your glucose levels. And so for me, paleo-esque, use it as a template, not a religion. Don't be dogmatic about it. And it's not the right dietary template for everyone. And I can demonstrate that because on the one hand, you can have vegans. And for this vegan, I feel amazing. And it's just the best thing ever. Everyone should be eating vegan. And then all the way on the other side, we've got carnivore. And oh my God, I feel so good on carnivore. Everyone should be doing carnivore. And both can be true for a time. And if both are true for those people, where does that leave us? Because you don't have two diets that are further apart from each other. And so what it ends up being is that everyone needs to figure out the right dietary template that works for them. And for most people, it's somewhere in between. And it might be more weighted towards fat and protein, or it might be weighted more towards carbohydrates. So you've got to figure out what works for you. But what I think is a universal truth for everyone is less processed foods is better. Eat your whole foods, get a sufficient amount of protein. I do think fiber is pretty important, all the phytonutrients, and have a whole lot of micronutrients, which you get from whole foods.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think we should be focusing heavily on nutrient density, not focusing so much on counting of the calories, all that sort of stuff. And like you say, just whole foods. Like it's hard to overeat whole foods. You feel pretty full when you sit down and you eat pretty much whole foods. And I think that's a good point to come back to too, because I see intermittent fasting as an add-on to a healthy diet. Because if you're eating a crap diet and then you're trying to put intermittent fasting on top of that, chances are you're missing a lot of nutrients in your diet. And now you're skipping a meal, then you're missing even more nutrients. So you're on this downward spiral where intermittent fasting might make you feel great when you first start it, but unless you're giving the body the resources it needs to survive in the meals that you are eating, well, then you're on like the train that's going to crash for sure. Would you agree?
Yeah. Like absolutely. Although some people find that they need something to break their food habits to scratch the record,
Yeah.
and then doing intermittent fasting or starting some kind of different dietary thing is the thing that breaks it, and then that causes a domino effect, and then all of a sudden they're having sardines for breakfast and doing all the wonderful stuff.
But not in their milkshake, mate.
Yeah, exactly. No, don't do that.
We could go back and talk about the basics and those pillars, but I'm curious, like, if I came to you and said, all right, my main focus now is my health span and my longevity, where do you start? Like, what's going to be the point of entry?
Well, data.
Yeah.
So we're in a time now where we've got access to data and testing that we just haven't had previously. And so it's not the case that you come to me and I'm like, okay, well, here, I'm going to give you that longevity protocol or the health span protocol, because the reality is you are a person and you look a little bit different to me, right? And we can both acknowledge that. Although interestingly, we don't look that much different. Like, we're pretty different, but people probably aren't going to get as confused. What we don't think about is that inside we are every bit as different. Your lungs are a little bit larger than mine. My liver's a little bit, bigger than yours. My gastrointestinal tract isn't so great because I got celiac. Like, we're different. We're as different or more different internally than we are externally. And so what's going on for you is different for me. So it wouldn't make sense for me to put you on the longevity protocol. What we have to do is learn about you as a human, right? So we can do that through two ways. One is subjectively, and that means you tell me, when I don't eat in the morning, I feel better. When I have more protein in my diet, I feel better. When I have too much carbohydrates, I don't feel so good. When I eat late at night, I don't feel so good. Great. Let's learn from all of that and experiment. And then there's objective data, and this is data that we can, access because we're in the modern world now, and we can do testing. And so we do testing, and we test your DNA, and it turns out that your chronotype, when you best sleep, means that you should be not eating late at night, and you should not be eating early in the morning. So let's get that genetic data. Let's get genetic data that says that your body doesn't do as well generating energy from carbs as it does from fat, right? So you get the genetics, and they show you the potential. You marry that up with the story, the stuff that you know about yourself or that you think you know about yourself, and then you add that to the pathology. And so the pathology is, we can look at what's going on with your insulin levels. We can give you a continuous glucose monitor and figure out exactly what it is that's happening with your glucose levels throughout the day. We can look at your lipoprotein little a and your lipoprotein B.
Yep.
Instead of saying, oh, well, here's the cardiovascular diet for you, we can say, these are the markers that show that you've got cardiovascular inflammation. You've got quite a lot of it. Therefore, we need to make these choices. Or what you're doing at the moment appears to be fine. Because if you're after longevity, heart attack's probably not so congruent with that. And we can get data on that. We can run a coronary calcium score and we can look at it. And so we can do that with your cardiovascular stuff, but we can also have a look at what's going on with your mitochondrial health. We can look at how your body is functionally doing generating energy from fat and carbs, and if you've got ketones spilling out into your urine. So we do the pathology labs, marry that up with the genetic potential and your story, and then we can start trying to triangulate things. And then over time, we can keep testing the pathology, and we can subjectively you can learn, and then we can start to tweak things until we figure out what works well for you. You can also use devices like HRV devices, which I don't know if have you spoken with your audience about HRV?
Yeah. I wear the Aura Ring and do my HRV. I haven't had a full conversation on the podcast yet about HRV, but yeah, I think it is a good marker. And I was going to ask you what sort of markers you were looking at. So it's interesting that it's sort of there. I find with my HRV personally, it's like, you got to look at the trends, like which way it's heading. Like some days it can tell me that my HRV is a bit low, but I wake up feeling fine. And other days it can tell me that my HRV is high. And I'm like, I just feel smashed today. But if I look at the trends and see where things are going, there's definitely a correlation to how I feel and how I perform and how I train and all those things. Yeah.
No, I think you kind of want to do both. So HRV, let's do it. Let's do HRV. Okay. So you and I say both have a heart rate of exactly 60 beats per minute. Okay. My heart is beating 1 beat every second, like a metronome. At the end of the minute, I've had 60, right? Yours isn't. Yours is like doing different stuff. You're beating it 1 second, then 1.02, 0.98, and there's variance in the intervals. Whose heart do you want?
Oh, mine.
Yeah, you don't want mine. Mine's got no idea what's going on with my internal biochemistry of the world. It's not reacting to anything. It's just kind of like plodding along, right? You don't want that. And so studies show that a lower variance in the intervals between the heart rate, the worse risk factor you are for all-cause mortality, right? So you want a relatively higher heart rate variability. Now, why is this important? Because you can measure this through devices like your Oura, your Whoop, or Apple Watch, your Samsung, like all these sorts of things. And there are different algorithms, and I think the Whoop and Oura probably get it more right than most of the rest of them. But you can measure this on a daily basis, and even like a spot check in the moment. And what you find is that when you make choices that don't work for your body, overall, your HRV will go down. And so you probably be able to observe it. You drink a bunch of grog and you don't have much sleep. And you do that for a little while and your HRV goes down. And then you start like going to bed at 10 o'clock and you meditate before bed and you're having your red light session and you're doing your sauna and all this kind of stuff. And then your HRV starts to go up. So you can use data to say, oh, when I make these choices, things tend to go better. But you can also use it in the moment where you wake up and your HRV is, say, 10% above your average. And you can go, today's the day that I'm going to hit it. And you do your HIIT training, right? And then you wake up and it's down below and you're like, oh, maybe I was going to go and do a pretty hard workout today, but maybe today's not the day to do it. Yeah. And so you can use that data over time to figure out what the right choices are for you. And then eventually the idea is that you get rid of the device because you've figured out that, drinking before bed and having a whole bunch of carbs before bed don't work for you, and you don't need the device to tell you that. And so you end up just being able to be in sync with your body. So again, use data that we can get these days. Yep. Then the other thing that you can do that we haven't been able to do previously is epigenetics. Have you spoken to your audience about epigenetics?
I haven't dived into epigenetics just yet. No.
Well, let's do a quick thing on epigenetics.
Yeah, dive in.
Genetics are the hand of cards that you were dealt when you were born. You cannot change them yet. Give it 10 years and you'll be able to use CRISPR and you'll be able to change stuff. Maybe it's 30 years, I don't know. At some point you'll be able to. And we're doing it now. It's pretty exciting. Anyway, you can't change your genes, but running your genetics so that you know what hand of cards you've got is pretty useful in figuring out how to play them. And so it's like, you've got the ApoE4 gene. And that means that, bad because you've got an increased risk of Alzheimer's, but it also means that your body doesn't do very well when you have saturated fat. And so in that instance, when you know those genetics, that's when I probably would give someone some advice to decrease saturated fat. And if they don't have those genes, then I'm probably not giving that advice, right? So it's individualized. That's your genes. But your genes aren't playing all of the time. They're a recipe book. And you take from that recipe book based on the scenario and what it is that you want to do. So if I handed you a CD, you cannot hear it. You can't hear it because it's not being played. The CD is just code for music. And in the same way, your genetics are the code for the music of life, but the playing of them is your epigenetics. It's which genes do we want to turn on and which genes are we going to leave off, right? I'm in a high calorie environment. I'm probably turning off the genes that are about calorie scarcity, and I don't need to, slow my metabolism down a whole lot, and vice versa. And so we can now read epigenetics, and that can tell you what's going on in your body at this point in time. And that's good because, interestingly, you can figure out what your biological age is, and they're not perfect; they're just an indicator. Yep. But the cool part is you can get your pace. And your pace of aging is how rapidly you are aging now. And so if you've got a pace of 1, that means for every calendar year that goes around, you're aging biologically 1 year. And if you're aging at a pace of 0.8 for each 5 calendar years that are going around, you're only aging 4 of those biologically. And that pace shifts around relatively quickly within weeks, within kind of like 6 weeks. And so you can do interventions and then monitor what's going on with your pace. And so you can be objective in saying, I did this thing for the last 2 months and my pace shifted around for the better or the worse. And that's pretty useful. And so when you are consistently like pinging your body for data to figure out what you are doing and whether it's working or not, then all of that ends up coming around to being the tools of longevity and health span. By and large, health span is just a function of living in a way that works for your body and not living in a way that doesn't. And so you're decreasing inflammation there, you're decreasing all of the stress on the body, you're giving it all the fuel and resources that you need, you're giving it enough time for recuperation, you're moving enough that you're processing out all the junk and you're creating new cells and keeping yourself vital, and you're increasing mitochondrial count. And if you do all of that stuff well, then you're going to live for a longer time with a higher quality of life. And that's health span. But what that looks like for you is different to what that looks like for me, and especially what it looks like for us as men is different to what it will look like for women whose bodies are different. And it'll be different for you in 20 years than it was 20 years ago and it is now. And so you constantly got to be figuring out what works well for my body now. And so if you're paying attention to it, then you're going to do better than if you're not.
100%, mate. So powerful, because we fall into that trap of just picking diets and doing certain exercise routines and avoiding certain foods or doing whatever, and it might not be the match for our genetics. And we can just fall into that false sense of like, I have to do this, or this is the thing I'm going to do because it's good for me. But the reality is it's different for every person. And that individualization that we get when we do that testing is just such a powerful insight into obviously who we are, like you say, what's going on under the hood. I like the way you talked about the CD. I haven't heard that analogy before. I always see the loaded gun one, like your genes are the loaded gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger. So just because you've got the gene that could lead to X, Y, Z, it doesn't mean it's active. I'm curious though, because when you talk about epigenetics, you talk about, so if I've got MTHFR, so bad methylation or detoxification pathways, and I feel that gene is active, can I switch that gene back off again, are you saying, depending on lifestyle? Once it's on, it's on.
Well, so there are some genes that turn on and off depending on what's going on in the environment and what your internal chemistry. There are some genes that are just the way that your body works. So MTHFR basically is an enzyme that talks about how you convert from folic acid through to active folate. And again, I'm actually oversimplifying it. There are a few steps in there, and you can have a reduction in your ability to methylate, and that means that if you don't figure out how to live in concordance with that, then you don't get enough methyl groups through, and methyl groups are required for, as you said, detoxification and a heck of a lot more than that, energy and kind of everything, all of your cells dividing. But that's just the way that your body does that. The things that turn on and off are things like heat exposure and cold exposure, and when your stress levels are high, and the amount of calories that are coming in, and what altitude you're living at determines how much hemoglobin you need to make. And so if you think about all of the various different environments and situations you can put a human into, all of those things turn on and off epigenetic switches. If you go into sleep deficit, you're changing your epigenetic switches. If you've got an immune challenge, you're changing your epigenetic switches. Things that vary within your life is where epigenetics will really come into play.
Yeah, awesome. That makes sense. I did have a question about, so you're talking about we're testing now the rate of which we're aging. So we can start to break down and we can figure that out. And obviously we can do experiments with different lifestyle changes to see if we can start to slow that down or speed that up and figure out, sort of what's going on for us. What are some of the things that have the biggest impact on that, do you see?
4 pillars.
Coming back to the basics. Good to hear.
If you start not sleeping, your pace of aging will worsen, i.e. increase. If you are not eating the right foods for your body, the same will happen. If you're overly stressed, the same will happen. If you're sedentary, the same will happen. And the inverse is true of all of those. And so it comes back to the basics. You've got to get the basics figured out of how your body works. then you can start to make the micro changes. But like 80% of it, it's the same Pareto principle as like the genetics that you were talking about. 80% of what goes on is the way that you live, 20% your genetics, right?
Yes.
Well, 80% of what goes on with your health in terms of what you're doing with the world is the basics. It's eat, sleep, move, stress. And then 20% is like you're taking resveratrol and you're taking your Urolithin A and you're doing your red light therapy and whatnot. But they're great and they do work and they help. But it's like trying to tune up a race car when actually there's a gasket blown and we're burning oil, and you don't tune up something that is fundamentally not functioning well. You get it functioning as well as you can, then you do the fine tuning stuff. And so get the basics right. I know it's not cool. I know it's not exciting. It's not the stuff people want to do. People want to do the cool things, that do their plunges, and they want to take supplements and get the free ride stuff. But the magic is just the basics. You just got to figure out what that means for you.
Yeah, it doesn't have a fancy biohack to it, mate. So we're like, it's too simple. Those little simple things, how can they have such a great impact? I need to spend money on all these gadgets and toys and supplementation, the one percenters. But like you say, if you just haven't got the basics right, the impact of that is just not even going to scratch the surface, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's an expensive thing to invest in all this sort of stuff. Like if I'm going to go and do genes and we're going to look at epigenetics and we're going to work on all this sort of stuff, there's obviously a big cost that comes with that. So how do you talk to your clients about that? Is there a reluctance to go into this because of the cost, or what are you saying?
Well, the people that we're working with are the people who have realised that it's worth investing in their health, and it makes sense to do. But that's not everyone. Not everyone can afford to do that. And that's tragic. But the good news is 80% of the benefits come from the basics. And so even if you don't have the tracking devices and the pathology, you can still figure out what works for your body, or just do the stuff that works for the majority of humans. The majority of humans do better with more sleep rather than less. The majority of humans do better with less stress rather than more. And you can get those basics right. Now, if you do have the means to, or desire to be able to get into the body more and do the testing, then you can do that stuff. And a lot of our patients that come in for optimization are people where, and this is not always true. We've definitely got people where the inverse is true, but they're often people who have won the money side of life and are now trying to buy more time.
Yeah.
And so the justification is, well, if I, can squeeze a few years more out of my life, or a little bit more productivity out of what's going on now, then it's a worthwhile investment. Like if your job is based on your cognitive ability and you can improve your cognitive ability by 10 or 20%, that is like pretty massive and can make a big difference to your productivity, let alone your longevity. And so in that case, if you're an entrepreneur and you're making decisions 10 or 20% better, then the money that you pay for the testing's probably been a pretty good investment. But it does depend on who you are, and you don't need to do all of the testing. It depends on your means and your motivation, really.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, mate. And I like what you said in the sense of like, okay, the testing is a good insight and we can get a lot from that. But I think sometimes the solution that comes back from the testing is the same sort of thing anyway. It's like, well, am I doing the basics right? Am I eating right? Am I getting sleep? Am I moving? Am I managing stress? There's all these little basic things that we can be doing that's going to have a huge impact on those tests anyway, even without getting the test done. So just, I think paying attention to those areas and obviously taking the steps to work on that is going to have a lot more benefits probably than some people even doing those tests in the first place. So I like what you say there. Yeah.
But there are also some testing that you can do that's not massively expensive.
Mm.
So we were talking about epigenetics earlier, and PACE is using epigenetics, and you can get biological age from epigenetics, all this kind of stuff as well. But there's this thing called the PhenoAge, PhENO, PhenoAge. And that is a pretty cheap test. It's got a bunch of biomarkers that are readily available, and it will spit out a pretty good biological age. It won't give you the pace, but for like $100, you
Yeah.
can get that done. You can get it done through eye screen. It's easy. Like there are some things that you can do that don't cost the world, but the things that you do with your time are free.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I ended up getting my ancestral done to get my genetics done. And it only comes back with all your gene numbers. It doesn't really give you much information. But then Rhonda Patrick on her website has the ability for you to upload, and she generates a report off that. And I think that's $25 US. So maybe for 150 Aussie dollars, I got my genetics and turned that into a report where I could look at all my different genes and get a better idea of maybe some do's and don'ts. So I think there's definitely ways around it. And then obviously we can use the health system a little bit to try and get as many as we can out of that. But yeah, I think it's also investing. Like your health is worth it, isn't it? Like if you're not investing in your health, you are just losing time. Is there a point in our life where you think this starts to be important? Because you were saying, look, as a kid, as a teenager, as growing up, you could probably get away with a lot of this. I think as we start to get into our 30s and 40s, like when would you say is a good time to start looking at all this sort of stuff?
So, when's a good time to start looking at it?
Yeah.
Like always, just the more you learn, the more it compounds over time. But the question that the audience probably wants to hear is 40s and 60s, because there's been some studies done recently that show that actually aging is not a linear process. And the assumption that you make is kind of like aging is relatively linear. But then when you actually think about it, you're like, hang on, no, it's not. You change pretty dramatically from 0 through to 20, and then not much change happens for quite some time, and then you change quite a lot toward the end parts of life. And so this is the idea that aging happens in waves, and there's a wave somewhere in the 40s, like kind of mid 40s, and a wave that happens somewhere in your 60s, and that's where people, and that'll vary person by person, the exact age, but that's when a lot of changes start to happen. And generally, people get motivated when changes start to happen, when pain happens, and when they can't do stuff that they've been able to take for granted for forever. And so, what mostly happens that I see is that the people, more often than not, the people that I work with for optimizing have been achieving a lot in the world, and they've been spending their tomorrow today for a very long time, i.e. burning the candles at both ends. And then they get to a point where they can't do it anymore, and they go, oh, something's wrong. I need to fix whatever that was. And it was kind of like, yeah, the thing that was wrong was the way that you've been using your body. It's like driving a car, and you're like, man, there's so much rapid acceleration when I drive around in second gear. So you're just driving around in second all the time. And it's kind of like and it's fine until your car starts to not be fine and you've worn it out. And so I tend to see people when things start to wear out, or when they go through those waves of aging, like, oh, my eyesight's, and my energy and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, yeah, aging does happen, but you can also learn to do a better job of what it is that you're doing with your body. And there are a few hacks that are going to work for your body, and we can figure those out.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. That's a good message. And I think it's that accumulation over time, isn't it? It's how we treat ourselves through that midlife, and then it starts to accumulate. And I often say it's like when the pain of staying the same is more painful than making the change, that's when people start to think about making the change. But I think the sooner we can get onto it, like you talked about at the start, it's the preventative health. If we get on top of these things early and we can start to learn a lot more about our body and make those changes, then we don't have to go through that pain or that uncomfortableness maybe, if we can stay on top for longer. I'm just curious, like, about a transformation. Can you give us like an idea of maybe a client you've worked with, or a few of the clients you've worked with? They're coming to you, they're sort of talking about health and longevity, they're investing in testing, they're doing the right sort of changes. What sort of transformation are you seeing? Like, how much is that rate of aging slowing down? Can you give us a bit of insight into that maybe?
Yeah, it depends on who you are and where you're starting from. So the best stories are the stories where the change is most dramatic. And so you tend to find those from the people who are making the least effort to start with. So I'm eating McDonald's and I'm overstressed and I'm not sleeping and all this kind of stuff. And then I can do not much. And it's like change the diet a little bit, give them some good advice. They're like, oh, I feel so much better. So it's easy to move the needle when it's starting from a place that's relatively poor. And so they'll tend to have a pace improvement from something that was, like more than one to begin with, and they can bring it down either to one or below. And that's more dramatic than the person who comes in and they're like, I've been paying attention to my health for 20 years, and how does all this lab stuff work? And now let's do testing to optimize it further. And you will see changes in these because people are blind to the things that they're blind to, right? Like the patient that comes in and they think they've figured out the right diet because they've consumed this information online and they're eating for a hypothetical human being that's not them, right? And then I have a look into what's going on with their cardiovascular system. It's like, you're a walking heart attack. And they had no idea because they're exercising 4 or 5 times a week. They're avoiding the worst of the food stuff, and the data can give them a pretty big shock. So the data can either be validating in what you're doing is working, or motivating in that maybe we need to be doing something different. But the biggest changes happen for the people who are doing more of the things that weren't working for their body rather than more. And now that we can use data, you can simply report that as a change in pace or a change in biological aging. You can see it as what's changing with their HRV. You can see it as what's changing with their insulin and their glucose, or they can see it just in terms of the quality of life that they're reporting.
Yeah.
My knees aren't sore anymore. I can, now run twice as far as I could before. It's working, like just the improvements that people tend to notice.
Yeah, incredible, mate. I like the way you pointed out that thing about the exercise, because more is not always better. And I think we can always think that, if I'm exercising, I'm doing myself good. But the reverse can be, the case, especially if you've got certain genes or certain things happening. I think, especially with the high intensity stuff these days, like where there's a big push on all the HIIT training, but people are doing it 5 days a week, and it's just applying such a huge volume of stress on their body, which is not beneficial, and it catches up with them over time. I used to own a gym in London, and trust me, the amount of time that members would be coming in to try and do, even some were trying to come in and do twice a day, just trying to tell them that this is not better for you. You actually need to do less. Like, I know you want to lose weight, but you're just going to burn yourself out if you push yourself that hard. I'm curious, like, where do you see the future of medicine? Because all this stuff that you're talking about, this is not conventional medicine. You're not going to go to your doctor and do your standard doctor and do these tests. But it's fascinating to me just to sort of see what you're talking about here, and curious just to think, well, geez, where's that going to go in 5 years, 10 years? What do you think is going to happen?
So a few things. First of all, I can't discount the possibility that you and I are living in an echo chamber of we're into this stuff. So we read a lot about it, about other people who are also interested in it. And there's, actually, there's not more general interest in it than there was before. I don't think that's true, but I don't know that. In terms of what's coming, I think AI is going to change everything. Because at the moment, when we do genetics, we're doing it in a really rudimentary way. We've identified that MTHFR is a gene that's important, right? And we go, well, a bunch of people have this health condition. Let's figure out the genetics that are common between them. And then we go, okay, there's a connection between these genetics and this health concern. Or let's have a look at people's genetics and see if there are any common health concerns. And we're doing it on a quite primitive level where this thing goes to that thing. But actually what's going to be happening is if you've got a 70% reduction in your ability to methylate, which isn't uncommon, but you're still alive and thriving at 40, then maybe MTHFR wasn't the biggest deal in the world for you. And we didn't know that actually there's this gene over here that is a methylation-dependent cancer gene, and that MTHFR is an adaptation where those two work well with each other, and that you've got an increased receptor site activity because of this gene over here, and it's going to be a concert of stuff. And humans just aren't good at processing that amount of data, but AI is going to be able to look at it and just go, oh, yeah, because of this, here's the sort of diet that you should eat. And I reckon that is just going to be a massive explosion for us. And again, AI with drugs. Like AI is coming out with tons of new drugs that we just wouldn't really come out with, and like uses for them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to start to be really exciting. Like antidepressants at the moment, the way that, you've got a mood disturbance, forget that you should change your diet and all the stuff we've just been going along with. Let's anticipate that we are, for whatever reason, going to be taking an antidepressant. And at the moment, it's kind of like, try this one. Didn't work, try that one. Didn't work, try this one. We do have genetic information now that says that this one's probably going to work better for you than that one. But give it 5 years, and like we'll get to the point where we might even be doing designer drugs, where you print something that works for your biochemistry, and that stuff is just going to be mind-blowing. Nothing's going to change about the basic functioning of the body, right? Like evolutionarily, we need to move, eat, sleep, move, stress. Those things are going to remain true, and none of that's going to evolve. It'll be all of our understanding of what's going on and our ability to intercede at critical points that that don't have too much of a collateral damage effect. And just the faster computers get, the more we're going to be able to do that. And I'm excited about it. Peptides and all this sort of stuff is going to be huge.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? I have heard Dr. Mark Wyman talk about it, and it was fascinating to hear him talk about like the human error in testing. And he was talking about some sort of retina scan where they can pick up, the chances of certain diseases from a scan of the retina. And to the human eye, it's really hard to pick up, and a lot of doctors will miss it. But AI, when it does it, it can pick it up, and you can see it to a level where humans would never pick it up. And it's just fascinating to think about the power of AI being used for something positive like that, and helping us to improve our health span and longevity. And even like you're saying about the DNA and looking at our genes, like that's going to be fascinating to see what it can piece together there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, we're living in a special time stretch. Like we're pretty lucky. Like, there's got our challenges and all that kind of stuff. There's some stuff going on in the world, but my God, what's coming is exciting.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Jabe, I really appreciate your time today. It's been awesome to chat to you, and it's opened the door to probably a few more tests or a few more things that I want to investigate myself, and look into that with a bit more detail. Is there anything else you want to add to my audience, which is going to be mainly men in midlife who are probably at that point in their life where they're really starting to think about their health span and start to question, what can they do to increase that? Is there anything you want to add as a final message?
Get your genetics run. Get a comprehensive cardiovascular profile run. Get the stuff that is going to make a really big difference. The things that kill people tend to be cardiovascular incidents. They tend to be cancer stuff. Like, figure out what your risk factors are for this. Get a little bit of data so that you can figure out how to live with your body, and you'll do a hell of a lot better than if you don't. Like, become data informed. It's like if you've got a business, you don't spin a wheel and figure out what your corporate strategy is going to be. You get data, you do testing, and you get objective about it. But for some reason with our health, it's not like that. It's kind of like, oh, I'll just do this, and everything will be fine. And then you don't have a great outcome until you learn about it later. But that's your health. You only get to do it once. Become data informed.
All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Midlife Mavericks podcast. If this episode hit home for you, don't just sit on it. Take action. If you're a man in midlife looking to regain your strength, energy, and purpose, check out the Midlife Mavericks membership, a community of high-performing men committed to leveling up their health and lifestyle. No fluff, no excuses, just results. Start by taking the Midlife Assessment Scorecard, a quick tool to help you identify the key areas holding you back and what to do about it. Because if you don't track it, you can't improve it. Head to midlife-mavericks.com.au to take the scorecard and learn more about the Midlife Mavericks membership. If this episode helped you, share it with a friend. Iron sharpens iron. Let's build stronger men together. Until next time, take ownership, take action, and keep pushing forward.